What's going on, Dolphins? It is your boy Dillon, and it is day 20 of training camp. It is actually officially the last day of training camp. Well, at least, open to the media and so on and so forth. I mean, they are going to be practicing this upcoming week, and then the following week they're going to be getting ready for, the Patriots game. And, this upcoming week of practice might even be, kind of the same thing as the following week. Like, they might just have a 2-week preparation time for the Patriots, right? So, anyway, point is, though, is it's the last day yesterday was the last day that was open to fans. Today was the last day supposedly open to the media. The only thing is, though, is I'm not actually seeing, like, anything on today's practice. So there obviously was a practice, though, it looks like. I'm just saying, because at this point it's 3:30 p.m. Pacific time, so West Coast time, because I live in California, obviously, and so that's 6:30 East Coast time. So I wanted to make a video, but as of right now, like, there's Dougley Do-Wrong hasn't put up any video. I'm not seeing, like, Alan Pupar hasn't put up any training camp notes from today's practice. Yeah, I mean, I'm not seeing anything for Travis Wingfield. He had one. He had the last thing he has on his Twitter feed is from yesterday. So I don't know. It doesn't really look like there's actually much about anything really from training camp today. So I don't know that there's gonna be. If there is, then I guess I'll just, I'll make another small video and just give you the roundup of stuff. Otherwise, I am gonna there are a couple Alan Pupar articles, though, that I want to read. One of them is training camp related. Well, I guess they're technically both training camp related. But anyway, you'll see what I'm talking about. Let's just go ahead and get right into it. So the first one is a history lesson with Dolphins final cuts. I'm actually going to add a little bit to this, though, at the end once I get through it, because there is a little bit, there is important context on this season in particular that I want to talk about. So let's see. Has the franchise had many regrets recently in terms of players it let go to get down to the roster limit? So in other words, in recent years, have the Dolphins cut any players when they've trimmed their roster down to the final 53 that they have regret leaving, let leave the building, right? Regret cutting. Now, real quick, I'll just, mention it, right? Because obviously we've talked about how we could potentially regret cutting some of these wide receivers, right? So there is some context on this season that I'll talk about at the end, but let's get through this. And let's see, the final roster cuts are getting closer and closer for the Miami Dolphins and the rest of the NFL, but the reality is that all but a few decisions have been made when it comes to who will get the 53 roster spots. They've pretty much already got it decided, I would think, for the most part. Obviously, this final game against the Bengals, the starters for the most part are not going to sit. You'll probably see some of the offensive line, and it's mostly for the backups, right, to figure out those last few spots or whatever. But anyway, and based on the past 20 years, the reality is that none of the players who end up not making the cut will go on to make the Dolphins regret their decision. So let's see what he has to say about that. Sure, several of them have resurfaced in the NFL. Many re-signed by the Dolphins sometime after being waived, but it's practically unheard of, at least since 2002, for a player to go on to shine in the NFL after being part of Miami's final cuts. That doesn't mean there haven't been any big name players or established veterans among the final cuts to the roster. So this is, let's be clear though, because the Dolphins obviously have had some notable free agents leave and then go on to have good careers or whatever, right? We know that. But this obviously isn't talking about free agency. This is, being a little bit more specific to, roster trim down to get to the final cuts. Among the quote-unquote final cuts to the roster limit, we put it in quotation marks because there's no such thing as final cuts, because the Dolphins have had their share this millennium. That list would include tackle Leon Searcy in 2002, wide receiver Antonio Freeman in 2004, defensive tackle Larry Chester in 2005, wide receiver Zahir Hakim in 2007, and tight end Dwayne Allen in 2019, but these are all players who were at or near the end of their NFL career. But in terms of players among the Dolphins' final cuts to 53 who went on to have long and or productive careers in the NFL, it's a very, very short list. The two names who jump out in that category are Eric Walden and punter Donnie Jones. He actually does a more comprehensive list here in a minute of various players from 2002 up till more recently, and I think there are some other notable names on there as well. Walden was mostly a special teams player in Miami, but he became a solid pass rushing outside linebacker after being among the final cuts in 2010. He went on to start 66 games for the Packers and Colts after leaving Miami, and had 11 sacks for Indianapolis in 2016 before ending his career the next year. Jones, meanwhile, was cut by the Dolphins in 2005 after 2 seasons and ended up playing 226 NFL games before his career ended after the 2018 season. The active NFL player with the most success since being among the Dolphins' final cuts to the 53-man limit is linebacker Neville Hewitt, who joined the Houston Texans this year after starting 32 games for the Jets the past 3 seasons. But our research showed not one single player earning a Pro Bowl invitation after being among the Dolphins' final cuts to 53 since 2002. That's something to keep in mind when the Dolphins made their roster moves before Tuesday at 4 p.m. Here's a rundown of the biggest name or most established player among the final cuts since 2002, along with the player who went on to have the most productive NFL career. Obviously, this is one man's opinion. So this is what he has to say. So 2002 biggest name, Leon Searcy. Most productive career, Obafemi Ayanbadejo. I hope I got that right. I probably didn't. But yeah, anyway, 03 biggest name was running back Robert Edwards. Most productive career was safety Jeremiah Bell. See, and that's the thing. Like, I think Jeremiah Bell's a pretty notable name. 04 biggest name wide receiver Antonio Freeman. Most productive career guard Billy Yates. 05 biggest name defensive tackle Larry Chester. Most productive career punter Donnie Jones. 06 biggest name fullback Fred Beasley. Productive career guard Josh Shaw. 07 biggest name wide receiver Zahir Hakim. Most productive career linebacker Jim Maxwell. 08 biggest name tight end Justin Peel. Productive career tight end Matthew Mulligan. 09 biggest name offensive line Nate Garner. Most productive career defensive tackle Ryan Baker. 2010 biggest name quarterback Pat White. Guard Donald Jones. Most productive career linebacker Eric Walden. 2011 biggest name fullback Lusaka Polite. I think that's a pretty significant one. I mean, there are a few throughout this, and we're going to get to a few more coming up. Most productive career linebacker Jonathan Freeney. 2012 biggest name linebacker Gary Guyton. Most productive career wide receiver Chris Hogan, another notable name. 2013 biggest name linebacker Austin Spittler. Most productive career running back Jonas Gray. 2014 was running back Daniel Thomas for biggest name, and most productive career defensive back Don Jones. 15 biggest name linebacker Mike Hull. Most productive career running back Mike Gillisley. 16 biggest name tackle Sam Young. Productive career guard Jameel Douglas. 2017, biggest name, punter Matt Darr. Most productive career, Neville Hewitt. 18, Kendall Langford, defensive line, biggest name, most productive career, kicker Greg Joseph. The only thing that confuses me here a little bit is at the end when he says, so 2019, biggest name, tight end Dwayne Allen, most productive career, quarterback Nick Needham. Did we cut Nick Needham in 2019 to get to the final 53? Because that's what we're talking about, right? Did we cut him and then re-sign him? Because that's possible. But obviously Nick Needham is on the team right now and is looking like one of our top backups at corner, right? Or maybe even the top slot corner. 2020, biggest name quarterback Josh Rosen. And then most productive career Salvan Ahmed, which again is on the roster right now. But there, some notable names throughout that. So the additional context, though, that I want to add to this, though, particularly for this season, is this year is a little bit different than a lot of these other years, right? Like, this actually happens to be a year where, there are a couple positions, one in particular, the wide receiver room, where we actually do have a ton of talent. And we're not going to be able to keep every single one of those guys. We're going to try and maybe get some of them on the practice squad, but, there's a chance that we're going to cut one or two players that we really like that could be really productive in the NFL, and we'll lose them to waivers, right? So, that is possible. That is very possible. Now, we'll have to wait and see how that plays out, but it is definitely possible. So just to add that little bit of context, and, obviously, in particular with the wide receiver group, I mean, that has obviously been a conversation with this team, all off season. So with this whole program, right? And being as deep at wide receiver as we are. It's even been part of the, have you used your resources properly conversation, right? Because yes, I agree that on one hand, this is a good problem to have, right? But on the other hand, they set themselves up with this problem, right? Because they didn't actually have to do that, right? Like maybe instead of taking Jalen, and this is I give this example. I've given this example a couple times now, and I give this one because I think overall this probably would have been the most ideal. Instead of taking Jalen Waddle, you could have gotten Penei Sewell, because you just signed Will Fuller to a 1-year deal, but it's a 1-year deal, but it's $10 million, right? And then you have Devontae Parker, Preston Williams, Albert Wilson, Kirk Merritt, all these guys, and then you had so many other guys in the room. I also get the injury thing. I get that too. But, you had and there's still some significant question marks on that offensive line, right? And, Penei Sewell certainly could have fucking helped that equation tremendously, right? So, anyway, it is an interesting conversation, and we will have to see how all that plays out. All right, so now let's get to the other topic, because this actually does play to some of my overall concerns with, this Dolphins team, and it's been the injuries, right? So let's see, rough go for top rookies. Injuries continue to be an issue for some of the Dolphins' top picks, and that could have some consequences at the start of the regular season. But let's also keep in mind that if it's a problem at the start of the regular season, it's probably not going to get any better, because you only get more beat up as you go through the season, and especially considering the fact that, man, it's a really long fucking season. It's an extra long season. 17 games, 18 weeks, right? And we don't have our bye week until late. So, if, God forbid, the offensive line struggles early on, and if the interior of that offensive line isn't as good as some people like to think it is and hope it is. It's been impressive in the preseason, particularly in the game against the Falcons, but, you know, against backups. And are they going to be able to do that and show that consistently throughout the season? Right? So obviously my biggest concerns, offensive line, depth on this roster, and injuries. But we've already had a ton of injuries to this point in training camp, right? So if the offensive line struggles and doesn't, you know, at least at the beginning of the year, and then if injuries start to pile up in the early part of the season, well, it could be an extra long season for Dolphins fans in another way. So let's hope that doesn't happen, obviously. But, you know, look, and people hate that I point this out, but the reality is that we've already had a ton of injuries. So I know people want me to just like ignore it, you know, or just, you know, real quick give you the news about the updates on injuries and then like never say anything else past that, right? But I can't do that because unfortunately it's a very real possibility that it's going to have an effect on this season, and injuries don't typically have a good effect on your season unless it's because the other teams that you're playing against are injury riddled, right? Which was the case last year for a lot of the teams we played, right? So, but if your team is the one that's injury riddled, it's obviously usually not a good thing for your season. So, anyway, let's go ahead and get through this. The Miami Dolphins were without safety Javon Holland and offensive lineman Liam Eichenberg on Friday when they conducted their first practice of 2021 in regular season mode, limited media access, and no fans. Continuing a disappointing trend that began in training camp. Put into simple terms, the progress of the Dolphins' top draft picks this summer has been hampered, and somewhat significantly because of various injuries. Holland and Eichenberg were among the Dolphins' 5 picks in the first 3 rounds of the 2021 NFL Draft, but only the team's top selection, Jalen Waddle, played in the first 2 preseason games. But he has also been getting nicked up, right? He's had, you know, at least a couple injury scares to this point. Right? So, fellow first-round pick Jalen Phillips, of course, missed the preseason opener at Chicago, which came a couple of days after he returned to practice following an absence because of a groin injury. Which, that's a terrible injury for him to have, right? Especially because, you know, we're relying on him to be explosive this season. Look, I've had a groin injury. I had one a few years ago. That shit probably needed surgery. Probably still could use surgery because it's never, that was back in 2017. So that was 4 years ago. Okay. It's still not 100%. Now, obviously he's got a lot better, you know, access to medical, you know, help and whatever than I do. Right. So obviously he's going to have he's a far, you know, in far better physical condition. I'm pretty sure I'm in pretty good condition, but you know, he's an athlete. So, you know, it's probably going to be easier for him, but if he's having to play through it during the season, we might not get that explosiveness that we're hoping and wanting to see from him. And it could significantly hamper him throughout the entire season. Because again, if he plays, you don't get healthier throughout the season. You get, you know, more beat up as you go throughout the season, unless you end up getting put on like injured reserve and you're resting, right? Or if you're just not playing or whatever. So, you know, it is a concern, man. It is a concern. And look, you know, I think it's a very real thing that the Dolphins are having to practice in this extreme heat on a regular basis. Every day that they're at practice, except for when they went to Chicago, has been in this outrageous heat, right? So that takes a massive toll on the body, and I think that legitimately has something to do with the fact that we've had all these numbers, and especially because look at the kind of injuries that we're having. A lot of them are like soft tissue or like, you know, we've had a bunch of hamstrings, groin injuries, ligaments and stuff like that. Nothing major with ligaments like ACLs, thankfully, knock on wood, like, and hopefully that remains the case. But like, you know what I'm saying? And so anyway, Also missing from that game was tight end Hunter Long, who missed the better part of 2 weeks after a scary looking knee injury that fortunately wasn't significant enough to keep him out of the lineup for very long. But he is wearing that giant brace. And if they do play him, and if they do use him, and he's practicing, again, knock on wood and everything, but hopefully, man, he doesn't get, hopefully it doesn't get injured worse. It is a knee injury, so, right? But it's really not the missed preseason games that's the issue here, but rather the missed practice time. I mean, it's all of it, right? Which absolutely is going to have an effect on one of more of those players at the start of the regular season and possibly longer. We can start with Holland, who had 4 interceptions in camp, including 2 in the joint practices with the Bears and the Atlanta Falcons, and looked ready to challenge veteran Jason McCourty for the starting safety job opposite Eric Rowe. Holland took part in the 2 joint practices with the Falcons before he mysteriously appeared on the list of scratches before the preseason game at Hard Rock Stadium and didn't practice at all this week. The injury didn't keep Holland from working with traders on the side throughout the week, so it's safe to assume it's nothing major, but the missed practice time isn't going to help Holland in his quest to earn significant playing time early in his NFL career. And again, if it's something, if a lot of they're not disclosing a lot of these issues or injuries, but it's safe to assume some of them we know are like, hamstrings and stuff like that and whatever. Some of them we do know, but like, some of them we know for sure are soft tissue, but a lot of them probably are soft tissue, right? But those are things that could be very lingering throughout the season. So, it is a concern, man. The same goes for Eichenberg, who, like Holland, got snaps with the first team at times during camp. He missed the Chicago game after sustaining a shoulder injury in a joint practice, and now is dealing with an apparent leg injury he sustained in practice Thursday. So this dude's now got a shoulder and leg injury. So great. He's double dosed on injuries. Fantastic. Eichenberg remained on the field after he was injured Thursday, but he stopped practicing and then wasn't out there Friday. Eichenberg remains listed as the first team left guard on the Dolphins depth chart, but it's second-year player Solomon Kindley, who is lined up there the past several practices, and in all likelihood will start the opener against New England at Gillette Stadium on September 12th. At this time, Eichenberg projects as the backup right tackle, and who knows when he'll be ready to make a move into the starting lineup, if it's going to happen this season at all. That probably wasn't the expectation when the Dolphins gave up a 2022 third-round pick to the New York Giants to move up 8 spots in the second round and take Eichenberg with the 42nd overall pick. But hey, look, man, I mean, if you guys have watched my channel, you guys know that I think that they have misprioritized, reached way too many times, taken way too many projects. They just make way too many risky and foolish and, whatever moves and stuff like that. Anyway, you know how I feel. So Phillips and Long played 27 and 20 snaps respectively against Atlanta, but it's obvious their development isn't as advanced as it would be if not for the missed practice time. Both of them play well. There's no guarantee that they would be any more advanced had they had that practice time, but there is an argument to be had that they could be, right? So anyway, both of them played positions where the Dolphins will be rotating players and aren't likely to be as affected by the missed practice time as Holland and especially Eichenberg. And even Waddle, though he played both preseason games, didn't get out of training camp with some injury issues. There clearly were times when he was limping at practice and or showed visible discomfort. The latest example coming Thursday when after catching a pass in practice, he slammed the football to the turf in frustration and got up very slowly. And look, bro, I know he's super important to this team. I know that, it's great that he's showing toughness and trying to be out there. But, bro, the more you keep pushing that envelope, eventually, and look, but what are you going to do? He has to, as long as he's not like, majorly injured, he's going to have to play. But unfortunately, there is a significant possibility, especially if he takes extra reps and, wear and tear on the tread and the tires and stuff, right? On special teams and returning punts or kicks, right? So, you know, I mean, again, knock on wood. You guys can't see me knocking on wood, but I'm knocking on my wooden desk here, and, you know, prayers, wishes, whatever, like, hopefully, but the trend so far through camp has not been good. Let's see. And, of course, there was the scare in the preseason game against Atlanta when he stayed on the ground after a running play, though replays showed he simply got kicked in the leg. Still, when you're dealing with a player whose best asset is speed, the last thing you want to see is that player get leg injuries, no matter how significant. The bottom line, yeah, because that shit adds up, bro. The bottom line is there's no reason to be down at all on the Dolphins 2021 draft, which still looks very promising from a long-term perspective, but the short-term expectations might have to be adjusted because of what's happened since the start of training camp, and that, unfortunately, is part of life in the NFL. Well, I mean, he's absolutely right about that. That is true. It is an unfortunate part of the NFL, but look, man, I mean, the real unfortunate part here, if I'm keeping it 100, completely 100 with you, is that there are major expectations on this season, okay? The Dolphins and Stephen Ross didn't implement the tanking philosophy in 2019 so that way we could, you know, not make it to the playoffs this year, especially with, you know, unexpectedly winning 5 games in 2019, even though you fielded like a high school football team, you know, quality football team that season. Or, you know, to be fair, it's more like, you know, an expansion team or a college team, right? To be fair, they weren't that bad. You know, they looked like they might have been that bad to start the season, right? But anyway, point is, so, you know, miraculously get 5 games that year, even though we know that was all Fitzpatrick and these, you know, young fucking nobodies who were playing for their careers and their families and shit, right? But then you double your win total in 10 wins last year and nearly make it to the playoffs, right? The expectations are way too high for us to have a ton of injuries and stuff or start off slow. The Dolphins cannot start this season off slow. They have to get look, in the first 6 games, they can't be worse than 3-3. And they got to get at least one of those, you know, division opponents in the first 2 weeks. They got to get a win there. So yeah, anyway, again, concerning, there are concerns. There's plenty of reason for optimism and hope for this team. But let's keep it real. Some of that optimism and hope is Jalen Waddle, Jalen Phillips, Javon Holland, Liam Eichenberg, Hunter Long, these guys that they got in this draft, right? Or even some of the young players from last year, right? Especially Tua, right? And God forbid, man, if he ends up getting nicked up because this offensive line can't protect well enough, right? Like, anyway, so with that, I'm gonna get out of here. Like I said, if there are any like actual notes, it doesn't appear that there's gonna be, but if there are any actual notes from the practice today, then I'll make another quick video. But for now, I'm just going to go ahead and get out of here. So I hope you guys appreciate my perspective. If you do, make sure you hit the subscribe button. Make sure you hit the like button. Make sure you hit the bell if you want to get the alerts. Share my channel and videos with your friends and family. Leave your questions, comments, and concerns down in the comment section. Of course, as always, follow me on Twitter at Dillon Tartaro. And with that, I'm out. I'll see y'all soon. Phins up.